Hey guys, thanks everyone for joining. We might just wait another couple of minutes, just probably wait to about 6 or 7 past, just for anyone who's late joining, and then we'll get kicked off and jump into the session. Once again, thanks for joining today. Uh, we might get started. I know everyone's time is valuable. We might kick off the session. Anyone who's late can catch up, and we'll be posting the videos online to the YouTube channel after this event anyway. So anyone who missed it will be able to catch in. Just a bit of housekeeping. Thank you for joining us today. I know porting is a big issue in migrating customers, so we just want to cover off on some of the high level points. We've also opened the Q&A session, so if any questions you do have pop up, feel free to post them in the Q&A session, and we'll cover them off after the session. Our wonderful channel director, Paul Saba, is on the webinar as well, so he'll be monitoring the Q&A session. So any questions you got, pump them through, and then we'll make sure we cover them off at the end. But let's get started. So today we just wanted to cover off on a couple of agenda points we put out there. Starting at the very basics, what is number porting, going through a bit of the process, what's the different types of number ports, some best practices, and just how to plan migrations and manage migrations. What is a fast track migration, and what does that mean, and how to do a fast track migration. And then not really number related porting, but all to do with numbers, just around how to order new numbers and how to reserve numbers. If you've got customers who want to reserve some nice looking numbers, what's that process? So we'll just cover off on that towards the end, and then we'll roll into Q&A time. So simply, what is porting? The correct term, if you're talking to ACMA or any of the telecommunications companies, local number portability, also known as number porting. simply the ability to move your main company's numbers from one carrier to another. So just like you do with your mobile phone, you decide to move from Telstra to Vodafone or Optus to Telstra, you can simply migrate and port that number across. Unfortunately, unlike mobile phone porting, where it's an instant service, local number portability in the fixed LAN world is still a manual process. There's been many reviews over the year by ACMA with white papers and round tables done and in industry think tanks on how to automate that process. And I believe we'll see that process streamline a lot when we move from a copper-based network. So as the copper network is currently being turned off, as that network changes over the coming years, as the copper network turns off and we move to a purely IP-based world, I think you'll find that we will see that will transition, and you'll see it become a more instantaneous porting process. But currently, it still is a manual process, and there's a number of steps which we'll cover off today. So what we want to cover off on the bit of the myths. So when we're porting numbers, especially fixed line numbers, there's kind of two categories of number ports, and this is where people get a little bit confused. So we have what you call a CADA by the industry and a CATC. So basically a simple and a complex port. And just want to cover off on what the differences is. Some people work off the general rule of thumb is if it's a single number, it's always a CADA port. Well, that's not necessarily true. It could become a CATC port. So the main difference between CADA and CATC is if it's a number range. So the easiest way is if you're looking at a customer's phone bill and trying to work out if it's a CADA or CATC. If it's a number range, it will always be a CATC port. So if it's more than one number, it will always be a CATC port. If it is a single line or your customer's moving from an old PBX and they had 3 or 4 PSTN lines plugged into it, one would normally assume that they're all a CADA port. So PSTN lines by default, if you're porting your home phone, say across, you got a single line at home, you want to port that to IP, that will be a CADA port. Traditionally, when you had PBX systems or phone systems, you had what you had line hunt or circular core hunting, where you'd have the main advertised number would be the first PSTN line, and then your phone system would have 3 or 4 additional lines plugged into it. And what it would do is if the first number rang and it was busy, you'd ring on to the next PSTN line and so forth and rotate through those lines. In that instance, because all those lines were part of what they called a rotary group or a hunt group or a circular queue, from a carrier's perspective, that's deemed a complex service. So if you wanted to port those four single PSTN lines, you'd have to do it as a CATC port. Now, there are some ways around that. You can remove that line hunt first, and then you can port the individual numbers. And one other thing to note, if you're ever in that situation porting, is you will need to port all the numbers as part of the line hunt. Even if the customer only wants to keep the main number, unfortunately, you have to port all 4 of them across, pay the complex porting costs for that, and then you can cancel those additional numbers. Unfortunately, it's just the way that it is. The other thing that will cause it to be a complex service is if they had ADSL on the line, they had the old fax duo on it, they had some sort of alarm, special alarm service on it. So anything other than just dial tone on a phone line, it will all be deemed a CATC port, whether it's a single line or not. If it's an ISDN service or anything like that, it will always be a CATC port by default. The other interesting one to note too is if the customer has a Telstra dot service, even if it's a single line, it will always be a CATC port regardless. It's just the way Telstra has built that product offering that dot will always be a CATC port. You can port out. There are some myths that people go around tell you that you can't port out of Telstra's dot program, digital office technology. You can actually do it, but it has to be done as a complex port. and you have to port all the services and also migrate the NBN at the same time. Normally, it's a bundle deal. You've got to move everything at once. Otherwise, you can't break the dot product around. One other thing to note around porting too, which we'll get in the porting reasons, is how losing carriers can reject ports and what can be rejected for. So we will cover that off shortly, as I know that's the other interesting one to people. High level process for porting numbers across. It's actually quite a simple process. Due to COVID at the moment, it seems a very long-winded, complex process, and it was caused a lot of issues recently with Telstra cancelling their porting. Telstra has reopened their porting now. They should be at full strength by the end of next month, so you should see Telstra ports, the porting time significantly reduced back to what we were seeing pre-COVID. But the general process for porting in numbers is we've broken it down to kind of 7 steps, just to understand. A lot of these steps have sub-processes to them, but the first few steps are quite simple. Is basically order received. So your customer goes, hey, we want to order a new service and there's porting required. Information being collected is you need to go through and collect the porting form. So I'm just going to quickly jump to the next slide around as we look at information required to port forms. So ACMA in Australia, being that our industry is so regulated, there is actually a formal process for porting. So we will need what they call a PAF or a porting form or a port authority form. They're all the same thing, they're just different lingo across the industry. So in order to port a number, we will need a PAF form filled in, as well as a copy of the current bill. Now, when we're talking a copy of the current bill, and customers go, well, why do you need access to it? It's not trying to work out what they're paying with their previous carrier. There is actually a legal requirement for us to validate that if someone's signing a PAF form, that they actually own those phone numbers. So the port of the bill is we only need to see the front page of the bill where it has who the telco is. So normally in the top corner, you got like your Telstra logo, Optus logo, where it shows the account name. So who's the bill actually in, the actual account name, the account number, and where it lists the services and all the phone numbers. We just need to prove and be able to prove that if a port's ever challenged, that hey, the company who we are porting it, say it's XYZ Meats, make sure that the numbers are on a bill currently in the name of XYZ Meats, and that they actually own those numbers and are legally able to port those numbers across. So that's the main details we do. In here on your porting form will be the phone numbers, the account name, the address is very key as well to make sure that the address actually matches where those phone numbers are currently being delivered. The authority, so who from the customer's authority to sign off. There's some T's and C's, making sure that they're the authority person that can actually port them across, and that is there any complex services on those ports so that we know whether they are CADA or CATC ports. One thing to note, site addresses need to be physical addresses. There is actually a legal obligation to keep the IP&D database up to date. IP&D database is used by emergency services. So when you call 000, they'll do a reverse number lookup and verify where that phone number is actually coming from, just to ensure that emergency services get dispatched to the correct location. So you need to make sure that that data is up to date. That's actually a legal requirement. So once you've collected all that information, you submit the porting form through. So currently that's done by emailing orders@switchconnect.com.au. You get back a ticket number, and that's then your tracking number for that porting. We are currently in the process of just making that process a bit more online. So it'll be an online form based. So it'll be a lot simpler to lodge those ports and a lot less physical paperwork. What happens then is we'll then submit that port to the losing carrier. So we'll work with our upstream carrier partners, and we will start the porting process. So the first step is we submit all the details to the losing carrier. Say it was Telstra, we send a request and go, hey, we wish to port these numbers. Can you please verify that this information is correct? This is normally where the longest part of the porting process is. So they'll get accepted, or they'll get rejected, or they'll take time. So in the current porting process, this is the delay we're seeing with Telstra currently, especially around CATC ports. CADA ports are more of an automated process, but CATC are still a manual process. So this is where the longest time to take to go accepted, and this is where the port will come back and get rejected or not. If, for instance, the port was all accepted, like I said, we'll cover off on rejection reasons soon. Port gets accepted by the losing carrier. They'll then come back and go, hey, port is ready for booking. With CADA ports, we can book them in straight away. So normally we'll automatically book a CADA port for a time 72 hours in advance. So we'll make sure that they're booked straight away. CATC ports, you actually need to book in a porting appointment. So we'll come back to you and go, hey, port's been ready accepted. Do you want to take the next available appointment, or do you want it on a certain date? When giving a date, it needs to be a minimum of 10 days in advance, just for the amount of time that it takes to go forwards and backs to book those processes in. Obviously, we'll then confirm that port's booked. Say it's 9 a.m. next Thursday. 9 a.m. next Thursday, the porting process will start. We'll notify you once the porting's been done, so that you can test those numbers and verify that they're done. Our system will automatically test phone numbers to make sure that they're hitting our platform. But it's just making sure that you've configured everything on your side, and then we close off that port. So that's really the high level process of a porting. It's the same process whether it's a CADA, CATC. It's really the same. It's just the time in porting those things are different. If we're talking 1300 and 1800 numbers, so premium numbers, it's really the exact same process. It's just that the waiting and port booking is normally done within 72, so 3 to 4 days. So it's just this whole process it's a more automated process, and it's done in 3 to 4 days rather than taking the length that a CADA and CATC port normally takes. The estimated times we normally work to is a CADA, category A single number. We're pushing to get that done within 10 days. Pre-COVID, we were seeing them done in about 5 days. And then a CATC is 10 to 14 days, is where we were seeing it pre-COVID. We have seen that gone back to that with other carriers, supporting from Optus and stuff at the moment. We've had CATCs go through in about 8 days. So it can be a pretty quick process. Just with Telstra at the moment, it's quite slow going, and 90% of the ports Telstra are involved in some way in importing them through. So that's where the slowdown has occurred. Like we said, porting form, we've covered off on the information that you need. As soon as you lodge an order and there's a porting in it, our team will normally reach out to you to get that porting form signed if we don't have it. But no port will be lodged unless we have one of these. It's actually a legal requirement. So unless we have a PAF form, no port will be lodged by our team. Port rejection reasons. So there's a number of reasons in which ports can be rejected. So one of the myths that a lot of carriers go around and say is a port cannot be rejected by a losing carrier for if a customer has an outstanding bill. So we've had a couple of customers move across to us where they've had a falling out with their previous telco or IT provider who was billing their service, and they want to move their numbers, and they're still in a dispute around a final bill or something like that. It is illegal in Australia for a carrier to reject a port out of numbers due to them currently being in contract, or that there's an overdue bill or a dispute around financial reasons. That is not a valid reason, and we've had a few that have been rejected because of that, and we've challenged them with ACMA and have won every time. So that is one of the myths that people don't know, but that is not a valid reason to reject a port. These are the kind of the common reason in why ports are rejected. The common one is missing numbers or incomplete number ranges. So this will be, say you had a ISDN service and you've ported the 100 number range. Sometimes on that ISDN service, there might have been other associated numbers to that service that mightn't list on the bill. So you'll need to pull those numbers. What we can do in those instances, if we can lodge what they call a PNB, port number validation, that's when we go back to the losing carrier and go, hey, give us all those missing numbers. What we'll normally do is if we get a missing number request back to you is we'll go, hey, go talk to the customer, get them to talk to their carrier, the losing carrier, and go, hey, is there any numbers missing? P&Vs, there are a charge, so it can make the cost of porting a little bit more expensive. So that's why we do that double check first. The other range is complex services. So you've put something in as a CADA, you didn't know that there was an old line hunt or rotary hunt on it, so it's got rejected because there's complex services. So it's as simple as we need to withdraw the port A, the CAT-A port, and lodge it as a CAT-C port. That one's fairly simple. Disconnected or inactive services, the number may still be appearing on the customer's bill, may still be working, but there's a pending disconnection notice. This is quite common. A rejection notice is if it's an old copper line, NBN's rolled around, the disconnection letter's been sent out to the customer and they haven't initiated a port already. Sometimes the disconnection flag goes on their phone and they'll get disconnected. A lot of the times we've just got to prove that the service is still active and we can port them through. So our team's very converse to that porting thing. The other thing to note too is if the customer has put an exchange-based diversion. So what an exchange-based diversion is say a customer moves from building A to building B, they move suburbs. Numbers in the old copper networks were all based on a local exchange. So local phone exchange, and you couldn't move numbers exchanges to exchanges. So once you go to IP LAN, once we terminate to the cloud, we can deliver that number anywhere globally. But in the old copper land is you couldn't move the numbers. So what happens is they had a local number in suburb 1, they moved to suburb 2, they wanted to keep that because that was their main advertised number. So what you used to be able to do is disconnect the service from the old premise where you used to have the office. And in essence, Telstra would do a call forward at the exchange, so an exchange-based diversion, forward that old advertised number to the new number at the new office, and then life would go on. So when you order a exchange-based diversion, you can prepay. So Telstra used to have a service where you could pay, I think it was like $200 for a year, and that would divert it. So it's kind of like a prepaid mobile, or you can pay a postpaid, pay it every month. If a customer has done an exchange-based diversion as a prepaid diversion, you can't port the numbers. It will show up as disconnected every single time. What you'll need to do is get them to contact their losing carrier, get them to change it over to a postpaid diversion, and then you'll be able to port it. So that's a quite common one will come up. There'll be exchange-based diversion numbers, and they'll come up and appear as disconnected, but all it is that they've got a prepaid exchange-based diversion on. The other ones that come up sometime is account number and service number mismatch. The wrong site address has been assigned to a phone number or things like that. These are really common where you've got large enterprises that have multi-sites. Sometimes they've got the wrong site address or it's an old site address that's in the database, or sometimes it could purely be the database information is out of date with the losing carrier. It sounds amusing, but it happens more often than you think. So these are reasons. Marvin and the audits team will work through with you as any of these come through and step you through the process in how to resolve them. But these are the kind of the main reasons in why we see ports rejected. How to plan a migration. Everyone goes, okay, well, that's great. I've got a customer coming on board. What's the best process? So from our experience in having done tons and tons of migrations, this is kind of the high level, and I just thought I'd talk you through this, and then we'll talk through the fast track process to explain that to you and how that kind of streamlines this and make this a seamless transition for your customers. So the first thing you want to do is obviously collect all the information, lodge the porting request, and once that porting request is in, actually go and start configuring the service. So you can go and configure their number range, even though the numbers haven't ported across the Switch Connect yet, because your end customer owns that number. We can actually present those phone numbers out to the PSTN phone network. So you can go and pre-configure, if we use Microsoft Teams, an instance for this, you can go and add all your phone systems, bring up the SIP trunk, the Teams SIP trunk to your Office 365 tenant. You can go and do all that already, have that all pre-configured, add the phone number, test that outbound dialing works and everything, so that when it comes to booking, it's just a matter of inbound calls, instead of running to their old system and their old carrier, will automatically start flowing across to their Office 365 environment and Teams, so that it's literally a seamless transition. All of a sudden, at the date of booking, it's just the phone on their desk is going to stop ringing, and then Microsoft Teams is going to start ringing. So that's the simplest way to do a port. But always make sure that you've pre-configured the service, especially with Microsoft Teams, that you've configured it at least a week before the porting date's booked. Don't leave it until the day before, because especially at the moment during COVID, we're seeing a lot of issues where Microsoft is taking longer to sync settings through their back-end system, where you'll get into an instance, numbers will port, we'll push them to 365, and Microsoft will reject it because they haven't synced the config through their whole network yet. So when we send the call to Microsoft's gateway, it doesn't know about the number, so it rejects the call. We've seen that quite regularly over the last 3 months. So make sure that you configure those services well in advance of when the porting is going to happen. We will provision, when you order a service from us, we'll provision, as soon as we get through the order, we'll normally provision that service straight away. So that service is technically active. Billing will actually start from that date, and when that service is actually activated, so that you can actually start making outbound calls. Even some customers we can provide a temporary inbound number as well, which will cover off as part of the fast track program. So what we've come up with is what we call the fast track migrations. So, hey, customer wants to move off their old PBX as soon as they can to Teams. So what you do is basically submit the porting application, configure everyone in Teams, verify outbound calls is working, and then what we do is we provide a temporary number that you can assign to an auto attendant and a call queue, so their inbound calls can come through when people dial their own number. And we've put a little bit of a diagram to step you through the different components. So obviously we've got, using Microsoft Teams as the example here, because I think most people registered for this webinar are selling our Teams calling product offering. So user in Teams, my existing number, we've made up a number, so 0799998888, makes an outbound call to someone's mobile phone. So what happens is, even though this is prior to this number being ported to our platform, so prior to that, when they ring out to that customer, we're presenting the from number as 99998888. So outbound calls work fine, seamlessly. Now, what happens is, the tricky thing in the fast track migration is, what happens is when that person makes an inbound call, so they call back that number. So say they missed the call, they get a missed call on their phone, they dial it back. What will happen is that number will still be pointed to the customer's existing phone system. But what we do in the back end is, on their call queue or their auto attendant in Teams, we will give you a temporary number that you can assign to that call queue and auto attendant. So you can, from your old provider, call forward that number across to that number. So when someone calls it back, it will hit the old platform, your old provider, whether that's a phone system or they do a diversion on their platform. It will call forward across then to the real number sitting on our platform that you can externally dial, and then those people can pick up that call. So the trick with this is if you've got like 100 number range for all your users, you will need to, even if we're presenting the individual numbers, you'll need to either call forward that whole 100 number range from the old system across to that temporary number. The only difference that will be is that you won't get direct in dial. So if this person calls back user A on, say, 8801, if that was their user, all those calls are going to go back through your auto attendant and call queue. You're just not going to get direct in dial numbers until those numbers port across. but at least you can get all those calls through and start ringing through. So this is where what we find in most businesses is they're presenting one office main number. They don't prevent individual DIDs. As you know, in Microsoft Teams, everyone needs a DID, like a real DID, but no one's presenting them. Everything goes back to an auto attendant anyway. So this is a very, very simple way that you can put your customer live today, start getting the value of Teams. When the port happens, simply, instead of the call hitting here, it literally goes straight across to Teams. So it just cuts out this leg of the call. It's a very great way to go across. The only thing you need to note is that your existing carrier may charge you to forward that call across because it's actually making an additional outbound call. So you just need to double check with the existing carrier if that's going to cost, or some customers are happy to pay it because they just want to start taking the value of Microsoft Teams. So that's just one thing to note. But this is what we see as the simplest way to migrate customers across, because then when it comes to porting, it's zero downtime. Instead of the numbers running here, then call forwarding across to here, they instantly start hitting the number that you've provisioned here, and then everything is business as usual. This is the simplest and easiest way to migrate customers across. So that's from a porting perspective. If we then go back to, hey, customers want to order new numbers. So obviously, as you know, especially with the Microsoft Teams product, is every extension that wants to make an outbound call in Teams needs to have a real national number. So a lot of customers may have one advertised number and then have 20 users, so you'll need a 20 in-dial range. How to order those numbers is quite simply, the information that we'll need is the number range, so how many numbers the customer wants, customer details, so contact details, address and phone number, the site address in where you want the numbers. Obviously, when we order numbers, we order it off the local exchange. So if it's a WA customer, if you give us a WA address, we'll give you an 08 number versus Sydney address. You lodge that request, so it's simply emailing orders@switchconnect.com.au with these details. That will create the ticket, generate the request. The numbers will be issued back. They're normally issued within 24 hours. Normally, it can be within a 2-hour period. It's a fairly quick and simple process. You can then configure them, testing, and then those numbers are ready to go. As soon as they're issued, those numbers will be live. You'll just need to tell us where you want those numbers routed, if it's a hosted customer or a Teams customer or whatever. If the customer only has Teams with us, we'll just point those numbers at their Office 365 environment for you. We do have some customers that come to us and go, if you have Asian customers in particular, this is quite a common request. They'll come to you and go, hey, I want a new number range, but can I see the list of numbers, because they want to pick a number range. And I say Asian because they want to pick numbers with certain numbers in them. Different cultures in Asia have different lucky numbers, and then some numbers are unlucky. I remember we had a customer, the Malaysian consulate, a few years ago, where we spun up a phone system in WA for them. We ordered some phone numbers, and we thought the number was really cool because it was like 08 83 555 444. We thought, hey, that's a really easy to remember number. Customer will love this. We actually got a complaint from the customer. Apparently in Malaysia, 5s mean 4 mean dead and 5 means drop. So basically, ringing their number equated to drop dead in their culture. So in the end, we had to actually go and swap the number for a different number. So if you do have Asian customers, just make sure you double check if you're ordering new number ranges that they may wish to pick the numbers. There are some cultural sensitive issues there. But how to request new numbers, reserve numbers. So same as before, same as ordering new numbers, you collect the same information, but send through as part of the request that you want to see what the next available numbers are. Send that request through the orders. We'll request off to our upstream carriers based on the details you send us, what's the next available bunch of numbers. This process can take 3 or 4 days to get that list back. You can then pick from that number range. we then order that number range and complete. So just note, this isn't a 2-hour turnaround. It can be up to 4 days to get that list back for you of available numbers. We're trying to do it in 24 hours, but sometimes there's limitations in upstream carriers getting the available numbers. Also note, there is a once-off charge for a reserve number. This is a cost that our upstream providers do that pass down, and it's a pass-through cost. I think it's not a very big cost. I'm pretty sure it's about $50. So it's a very, very not an expensive charge, but it is the same. So that's all I really had to present today. So I hope that's given you an overview of what porting process is, the different types of ports, how to lodge ports, what the process, rejections, and then how to order numbers, how to reserve numbers. So we will jump into a Q&A time. I'm just going to jump over to the Q&A list and see if anyone has posted any questions. There is a question here. About customers having, I've just published the question, customers having issues with Telstra doing diverts and call forwards. So normally there's not an issue doing it. I do know under COVID, Telstra put a halt on doing any ads move changes across their network unless it was your medical and life and death situation. So what you can do is, if they're a PSTN service, so like a copper phone line, on Telstra, you can simply plug in an old analog phone and do the old *21 call forward. That's the easiest way to do them if it's a single copper line. If it's an ISDN service, you can either do it from the existing phone system, whatever that ISDN is connecting to, you can log in and divert it. The other one is, unfortunately, you have to get Telstra to do it. The other thing to note about 100 number range 2 with Telstra is they'll only divert the 100 number range to one number. So if you want to do a diversion on 100 number range, say it's sitting on an ISDN service, they'll only ever divert that to one phone number. So so you'll lose all your direct indel. So if anyone rings any number in that 100 number range, you'll all ring the same answer point number. So that's one thing to note from 100 number ranges diverts. But unfortunately, Telstra is probably difficult at the moment, but it should get better towards the end of this month. Oh, you got another question. Let me jump over here. The question is, if we currently are using a dummy number range and diverting our current phone system to these numbers until the number port, do we now use our real number range? So yes, I would configure on the users, I would configure the real number on the users in Teams so they ring out. So what you can do, so obviously a user in Teams, like if we're talking Teams, a user in Teams can have only one DID number assigned to them, so only one number assigned to them. You can, on auto attendance and call queues, you can actually have multiple numbers assigned to them. So for every resource account, you can actually add a number to. So what you can do is on the auto attendant, you actually add two resource accounts, one with the real number from their real number range, and then one with the temporary number, so that when you so that both numbers will ring through. So the dummy number will ring through. When the numbers port, the real number will work. And then what you can do is after the port, just remove that resource account with the dummy phone number in it. And once you remove that, calls will then keep flowing through. And in that case, you can present out your real numbers even though they haven't ported across. So that's the way we'd normally recommend to do it. We have had other customers that when they port across, when they got new customers, they'll order, say, a new 100 number range for the customer, assign all the number range to the individual users, and then on the old phone system, forward each number across so that direct indels still work. That's another way that you can do it. And then once they migrate across, we just cancel that second 100 number, the temporary 100 number range. The only instance in that is that on the individual extensions, you may have a downtime in direct in-dial numbers when they port across, because you need to then go and reconfigure the phone number assigned to each user in Teams. And depending on the sync time in Microsoft, you may have an outage in that situation. So that's where you may have some issues. But normally we'd recommend configuring the real number to them. So when they ring out, presents that number, and then just divert that through to a temporary number on their auto attendant and call queue. You haven't sent this to me in email. Yes, Andrew, I will send those details through to you. Any other questions? Just another piece of housekeeping. So we've started this new series, the Partner Fast Track series. We're trying to cover off on all the topics that basically any questions Paul and I constantly get asked. We are trying to fill in so that we can make sure that you guys get the answers that you need, and that you can basically go out there and sell more. So we've got the Partner Fast Track series that will be running probably over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So after this, you will get a webinar survey through, a couple of questions: how easy was it to join, how you rate the content. One of the other key questions in there is what topic you want to see covered next. So we're going to try and run these every Thursday, same time every Thursday for the next 6 to 8 weeks. So yeah, it'd be great to get your feedback on what content you want to see us cover. The one topic that we will be covering next week is really a recap on Microsoft Teams, and also the final feature that I know all of our partners have been waiting for, the ability to sell Teams on Business Premium, and what that looks like, and how to order it, and how to provision it, and what's the best practices on doing a Teams provisioning. So that will be the topic for next week. There'll be invite emails probably going out tomorrow. So check out your email for that. One last question just came through is how much outage on a port when it occurs. Normally, we try and keep it very limited. Normally on a CADA port, the downtime is normally fairly quick. It normally flicks across. Sometimes on CATC, if you've got an appointment booked at say 10 o'clock, it can take up for an hour for that port to go through. Especially on every carrier. Sometimes carriers will take time to sync those rules through, so it can take up to an hour. Normally the downtime is very little. It kind of will ring on the old system, or it will ring on the new system, but you may see an issue where if your system, the old provider rings, but on the you ring it from a Vodafone mobile, and it may ring through to us, and that's just as simple as, hey, the rules haven't sunk through the carrier's network yet. So so that is something to note, but it's normally fairly streamlined. We do have some automated tests that go through to make sure that goes through, but it can be up to half an hour to 45 minutes. Cool. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. Thanks once again, guys, for joining. I know we did this series quite regularly last year, just due to COVID. It's been a bit slow start to the year, but we will be running these weekly. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining us. Any more questions, feel free to reach out to Paul and myself and book in a session. We're more than happy to help you, take you through any of these processes. Thanks, guys, and talk soon.